Betrayal doesn't always scream, it leans in and whispers. The moment a guard bent to my shoulder and said, "Sir, when your daughter left, I saw her pour something into your juice." The world tilted. Celebration turned into calculation, and a lifetime of trust became evidence waiting to be gathered. No speeches, no scenes, just a father swallowing the kind of silence that breaks bones, deciding in one breath whether to collapse or to document, protect, and fight back with the only weapons that hold: proof, procedure, and a steady hand. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Freedom smells like warm leather and a faint trace of feed store dust rising from the portfolio on my kitchen island. I'm Thomas Whitman, Tom to everyone but my late wife, 67, Texas-born, stubborn as a sun-bleached fence post. I built Mesa Care in a Round Rock garage that baked every August, a small elder care software shop that learned to be useful long before it learned to look impressive. Today, the board is calm, the books are clean, and a buyer with steady hands is waiting. I live alone now in Santa Fe, where afternoon light slants across the adobe like a benediction, and the mountains keep the horizon honest. 5 years have passed since Maggie's funeral taught me grief's arithmetic. Last winter, a small stroke tapped my shoulder and suggested that stubbornness is not a health plan. I moved to altitude and quiet, promised myself I'd commute to Austin only twice a month, and learned the local names for wind. My mornings apprenticed me to routine: slow laps at the Chavez Center, coffee at Iconic, where graduate students argue brands like saints used to argue doctrine, then a climb up Hyde Park Road whenever the aspens flicker like coins in a jar. The rhythm is less about fitness than proof I can still set the metronome and keep time. Mesa Care's beginnings were bare-knuckle practical. I wrote code while Maggie balanced the checkbook and our daughter colored at the table. We sold tools to county homes and church basement facilities with more heart than budget, priced like neighbors, answered the support line like kin. Word traveled in nurses' vans and across folding chairs where directors compared notes between shift changes. We grew the way mesquite grows, quietly, roots first. The office left the garage, the culture never did. Now Horizon Care Systems wants the whole kit: cash at close, a tidy earnout, 36.5 million reasons to stop pretending that a workday is a sacrament. It isn't island money, it's time money, and at my age, time is the currency that buys breath. Priya Raman, their CEO, reads contracts like an engineer and speaks in complete sentences. My attorney underlines what must be underlined. I mark different lines, the ones that say I can fish on a Tuesday without a board packet in my bag, the ones that let me be a man again instead of a calendar and shoes. The Atlas stays open on the island, bristling with sticky notes. Glacier, where the air tastes like snowmelt. Acadia, where granite keeps the morning. The Big Sur run. I promised Maggie we'd drive and never did. I'm not aiming to be elsewhere so much as to be fully here, wherever here happens to be. I keep a pin in the crease and sketch itineraries I can throw away without guilt. A man learns slowly that plans are lighter when they're penciled. Claire is 34 now, bright as a winter noon, my only child, and the sharpest argument I ever won with myself. She married Noah Park, an ideas man who can pitch midnight sunshine and make you want to buy shades. He isn't cruel, he's hungry, and hunger can confuse appetite with entitlement if no one teaches it manners. I tell myself marriage is a weather system. Sometimes wind shifts and a boat corrects. Sometimes a squall decides its destiny. I keep a hand on the tiller and my mouth mostly shut because fathers learn that silence can be a form of love. The house keeps Maggie in small, stubborn ways. A wool coat whispers lavender from the hall. A pecan pie recipe card, butter-stained by holidays, hides beneath a trout magnet on the fridge. When I lift the portfolio, I hear her voice in the room's after ring. "Keep your shoulder down, Tom." She meant my chip shot. She meant my temper. "I'm trying," I answer, and the reply startles me because it isn't for effect. A widower learns that talking to the air isn't madness, it's maintenance. I visit the office less, but the garage photo still hangs opposite the elevator, a reminder that rooms can be earned. Our code base is tidy, our documentation plain, our support folks know the difference between a bug, and a bad day. If Mesa Care has a brand, it's usefulness, and usefulness is a morality I can defend. The team will be fine without me because they already are, which is the point of teams, to make an exit an act of stewardship instead of surrender. The plan I rehearse could live on an index card. Close the sale to Horizon Care for $36.5 million and a fair earnout. Breathe. Host a quiet dinner at Canyon Flame, all copper walls and mountain windows. Tell Claire that for the first time since she was born, I intend to live a year without a calendar. No investor updates, no trade show sprints, no end-of-quarter gymnastics. Desert hikes, roadside motels, a bench by the pool where old men compare scars and shoulder surgeries. I will let the atlas, not my inbox, decide the shape of a week. I know the arithmetic of endings. When you sign a thing, another thing begins. Money doesn't change character so much as amplify it. I want to believe it will make me kinder to cashiers and slower to anger at lights that stay red too long. Mostly I want it to make me available, not impressive, present, not busy. If there's a new discipline to learn, it's leaving a day unassigned and still calling it a good day. Evenings, I test the edge of leisure like a man warming his hands at a fire he built. I cook simple meals and oversalt them. I sort the garage and find artifacts from a decade that refuses to admit its past. A misprinted stack of CDs, a trade show badge with my name misspelled, a coffee mug with a slogan I never liked. Into the bin they go. The atlas stays. The portfolio returns to the island where I can see it when I pass, a reminder that the world won't end if I put the pen down for an afternoon. Sometimes I wake before dawn and walk the block. Stucco glows in the streetlights. Somewhere a coyote tests a fence. I think about the men I started with who burned out or were eaten by jobs that mistook them for fuel. I have been lucky and I have been disciplined. Those two are cousins who rarely visit together. The board will be fine, the team will be fine, and if I do this right, I will be fine. On the calendar, a small square waits for a reservation at Canyon Flame, a table big enough for relief. I wrote it on a day when my hands were steady and my heart knew what it wanted. I still do. A week before closing, Sunday light pooled in my adobe kitchen the way cream folds into coffee, slow and sure. I whisked eggs with green chili while the kettle sighed and the wood table warmed under a square of high desert sun. The morning felt domestic and harmless, the kind of hour that teaches a man to round off the sharp corners of memory. I set out plates, turned the radio low, and told myself that simple routines are a kind of proof. Claire arrived with cinnamon on her coat and purpose in her step. We drifted through small talk about the weather, the aspens above Hyde Park, the bake sale she was helping with at church. Then, without changing tone, she asked if my health directives were current and whether I had considered consolidating powers of attorney. She said a notary she knew could swing by after brunch if that's convenient. The phrase was friendly, the timing was not. I kept my eyes on the skillet and said we could revisit it in a week after the closing, when paperwork would be a celebration rather than a test. Noah trailed in with contractor dust at his cuffs and the restless glance of a man measuring angles. While I poured coffee, he let his gaze travel the length of the hall, paused at the framed map near the office door, then scanned the wall where my safe used to be. I had promised myself to move it long ago. Promises age faster than steel. I made a note with the same part of my brain that catches a bad line of code. Quiet, clinical, unafraid to put a red circle around a flaw. They ate, they complimented, they left in a bustle of gratitude. By mid-afternoon, a florist rang. A congratulatory bouquet stood in the doorway like a guest who knows no one. The card was signed PR in a round hand that did not belong to Priya Raman, who writes emails like a blueprint and avoids gestures that waste intent. The flowers were too sweet by half. I set them on the counter anyway because a lifetime of manners is not easily dismissed. Near 4, my banker called to confirm a request to raise my same-day wire limit. He said the branch had received the instruction from my address and just needed voice consent. I told him to hold all changes until he heard me say otherwise on a recorded line. He apologized for the bother and used my first name the way people do when they want you to think you are still steering. I took a breath that felt like a drop and wrote the time down in the margin of my to-do list. At dusk, I forwarded Horizon Care's draft press release to Claire, a gesture of inclusion that felt right. Less than a minute later, she sent edits that reframed the story around family legacy and added a line about me transitioning due to ongoing health considerations. Ongoing sat on the screen like a splinter under the nail. I stared until the word looked like a code token from a language I no longer trusted. I pulled the deal binder from the leather portfolio and turned to the escrow provisions I had skimmed too quickly when optimism was louder than caution. The morality clause could be torqued by rumor. The competency clause could be tripped by a single night in a hospital bed with the wrong box checked. I underlined both, once for the lawyer in me and twice for the father I am. I poured an inch of rye and let it stand until the glass made a ring on the page that looked like an eclipse. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like myself. Color back since the stroke, eyes clear, a man who knows his passwords and his purpose. Still, I heard Maggie's voice, gentle, not scolding, saying that love is a blind spot you must keep sweeping with your headlights. I said, "I'm watching," and put the glass in the sink before I could make a second mistake. I tried to be merciful with the data, a notary who just happens to be available, a banker who confirms a change I did not order, a bouquet signed with initials that are not a habit of the sender, edits that bend a narrative toward frailty. Any one of these could be nothing. Together, they felt like weather changing over a mesa, first a smell, then a shadow, then a wind you cannot argue with. I went room to room gathering paper the way a medic gathers gauze. Medical letters, clean scans, the neurologist's note that used fully competent without hedging. I clipped them to the back of the portfolio where they would be ready if doubt tried to draft the script. I slid the florist's card beside them, a small rectangle of sweetness that now read like evidence. Before bed, I opened the atlas to Big Sur and let my finger follow the coastline past names Maggie loved to say out loud. I wrote the day's times in a notebook, a habit learned from audits and storms. The kitchen smelled of flowers and coffee grounds. Somewhere in the house, a register ticked as metal cooled. I told myself the mind is a better sensor when the heart is quiet. Before lights out, I laid the card beside the portfolio and set a pin across it, a small ritual to make my hands remember what my heart might excuse. I logged each call in a notebook, dates and minutes in a neat column like a pilot marking checkpoints across open sky. At dawn, my phone chimed. Claire suggested we celebrate the closing a little early at Canyon Flame, just a simple dinner to toast new beginnings. I said yes. I wanted to believe the morning version of every story. I also wanted, finally, to put suspicion on the calendar next to hope and see which one kept the appointment. I shaved, I dressed, I locked the door with care. The atlas lay open on the island, the portfolio rested beside it, and the card marked PR waited like a question I would carry into the evening. Canyon Flame glowed like a kiln, copper walls catching the last wash of sun, while the windows framed the Sangre de Cristo as if the range had wandered in to eavesdrop. Patio heaters hissed softly, glasses rang in a civilized clatter, and a trio in the corner let a brushed snare keep time for people who wanted to believe evenings could still be simple. Our table sat close to the glass, a place chosen for celebration, not strategy. I ordered a ribeye and a tall orange juice because I wanted clarity more than bravado. Claire laughed and called it wholesome for a man about to cash out, and I let the joke sit between us like a coaster. She excused herself to take a contractor call, phone already at her ear as she threaded through the room. The chair was still warm when a man in a navy blazer drifted to my shoulder and bent just enough to avoid theater. He wore his badge low, the way professionals do when they care more about function than show. When she left, he murmured, "I saw her pour something into your juice." His voice was courteous, not dramatic. He motioned with his chin toward a ceiling camera angled past the bar. "Please don't touch the glass." My throat tightened, and then, as if a switch had been thrown in an old breaker box, everything inside me leveled. I nodded once to show I had heard. Claire returned with that bright, forward smile she learned in high school plays and never fully surrendered. Music shifted to a standard every room pretends it owns. She lifted her wine. "To new chapters." I raised my water and found a tone that didn't betray the new geography underfoot. "To what comes next." The orange juice caught the heater's glow and looked harmless as breakfast. I left it where it was and asked about tile samples and whether the contractor had found the right grout. She gave me a glossed summary and reached across the linen to squeeze my wrist, the way she did at 6 when a thunderclap turned a living room into a drum. Her glance flicked, quick and sideways, to my untouched glass. The server delivered our plates with choreography a ballroom judge would rate highly. Claire praised the crust, praised the wine, praised the view. When she excused herself for the powder room, the man in the blazer returned as if to refill my water. "Luis Delgado," he said, almost without moving his lips, and slid a clear biohazard sleeve onto the tablecloth. I set my phone against the bread plate and tapped record. He pulled on nitrile gloves from a pocket kit, lifted the stem, and eased the glass into the sleeve. The zip hissed shut. He printed a small label with the restaurant's timestamp, wrote the table number, and pressed it on with the calm of someone who understands that order is a kind of mercy. Chain of custody, improvised but respectable enough to stand upright. I could feel my pulse in my fingertip where it touched the linen. I tucked both hands in my lap and breathed like a swimmer counting tiles. Through the glass, I tracked the camera Luis had pointed to. From that angle, a hand extending over my setting would be more than a suggestion. He poured club soda into a fresh tumbler, set it where the orange juice had been, and caught my eye. I gave him the smallest nod I own. Not yet for the police. Proof first, then the world. Claire came back with a compliment about the trio and a critique about the ladies' room lighting that might have been theater notes. I speared a piece of steak I could not taste and let the conversation shuttle back and forth over safe ground. Travel plans, whether winter would arrive early, the best time to drive to Taos for snow that behaves. She asked if the juice was good, and I said I was saving it for dessert, a habit I invented on the spot. She smiled, then failed to hide a fractional hitch where a smile hands off to relief. The trio brushed into a tune Maggie loved, and I looked past Claire's shoulder into a decade that felt suddenly very close and very far. Louis circulated, never still long enough to become a pattern, topping waters and nodding to the saxophonist. When he leaned to adjust the candle, he whispered that he would archive the camera angle and that I could speak with the manager before leaving. The room remained a room. Conversations rose and fell. Knives whispered against porcelain. Panic wanted a stage. I gave it a hallway in the back of my mind and closed the door. The body keeps its own ledger. A twinge behind the left eye, heat at the base of the neck, a tremor small enough that it could pass for a draft. I pressed my palms together under the table like a parishioner and counted backward by sevens until math felt like a handle again. Claire touched my wrist once more and told me we should plan a joint press note for friends who didn't read industry releases. I said we would after close in daylight with clear heads. She nodded as if we had always agreed. Outside the window, a line of tail lights slid down the hill like beads on a wire. Inside, the heater's blue heart kept its whisper. I took in the details because details are the lifelines a mind throws itself when the ground refuses to stay flat. The nick on the steak knife spine, the faint coffee stain near the edge of the linen, the way the saxophonist lifted his heel on the 2 and the 4. Claire lifted her glass again and we toasted nothing in particular. The club soda snapped against my teeth. The sealed sleeve sat in the shadow of the bread basket, quieter than danger usually looks. I signaled for the check. Claire teased me about my newfound habit of early nights. I told her the day had been longer than I'd planned and that even good news wears a man out if he's honest about it. She offered dessert. I deferred. She asked for a dance. I offered a rain check we both knew would not be cashed. The manager stopped by with a practiced smile. Luis hovered at a distance that counted as courtesy. I signed, left a tip large enough to pay a shift, and stood with the slow, deliberate pace of someone whose joints had earned the right to be consulted. We stepped into the mild cold where the city's edges felt closer than they had an hour before. The restaurant breathed behind us. I told Claire I would text when I was home so she wouldn't worry. She kissed my cheek and said I was indestructible. I watched her walk toward the valet stand, small and certain and unreadable, and decided that leaving quietly was the only honest way to carry what I now knew. Proof travels best when it doesn't rattle. Advice and law would come next, in the order they should. For now, I let the night hold my breath until it steadied, and I started the slow business of going home in one piece. Before I signaled for the check, I had already slipped down the corridor by the kitchen, past the rattle of plates and the steady thrum of the dish machine. The tile was cool through my soles, and the angle of the wall gave me a pocket of privacy. I called my cardiologist neighbor because fear behaves better when given a professional to answer to. I described a tasteless addition to orange juice, quick onset, fog rather than fireworks. He didn't dramatize it. He said benzodiazepine, likely lorazepam or clonazepam, would make me compliant, sleepy, suggestible, and that it would pair too well with a pin thrust under a hand. He told me not to sign anything tonight and to get a toxicology pull as soon as I could. The clinical language put rails on thoughts that wanted to run. I texted Priya while the machine breath hissed behind me, asked her to move our wire confirmation call to morning. No explanation, just the kind of short request executives recognize as a flare that will resolve with sunlight. Then I messaged my attorney to prepare a competency letter with a hard timestamp, something notarized and dated that a rumor could not dislodge. The habits that built a company, documentation, sequence, redundancies, were suddenly the habits that would keep my name from being rewritten while I slept. Back at the table, I replaced the sealed orange juice with club soda, returned my face to neutral, and let conversation hang off the safe pegs. Cabinetry delays, whether winter would arrive all at once, how long I'd stay in Glacier when I finally went. I asked lightly if Claire still used the leather folio she carried in grad school. She smiled and patted her tote, a magician acknowledging the presence of a prop. The gesture landed in my notebook even if my hand didn't move. Luis floated to our orbit like any other server crossing the room. When he set a fresh napkin at my elbow, he said the camera had the pour, a small vial, a clean angle. He asked whether I wanted police now or proof first. Proof first, I told him with the smallest nod, because accusations without a spine feed themselves and never die. He drifted away, and I managed the pace of a man for whom nothing unusual had happened. Claire's voice softened into that careful register adult children adopt when they want to reframe control as care. She suggested we update powers of attorney while we were already signing things this week, and mentioned almost as an afterthought that a notary she trusted was at the bar in case we felt sentimental. I let the offer sit like a coin on the table. Daylight, I said, keeping the tone conversational. After close. Clear heads. She nodded, but a shadow of calculation crossed and vanished, as quick as a swallow's turn. Earlier, when the trio slid into Moon River, I'd tried to pull the night back toward sweetness and asked if she wanted to step onto the small square of dance floor. She declined with an apologetic smile, said another time, and kept her seat as if proximity to the paperwork mattered more than a song that belonged to her mother. Later, near the end, she playfully floated the idea of a dance. I gave her a rain check like a man who knows that music can be a trap if you let it. When I asked for the check, I did it without haste. Large tips soothe witnesses and reward decency. The manager stopped by with a crafted smile. Luis stayed inside my peripheral vision without making a point of it. From the window, the mountains looked like something a painter would lavish patience on. Inside the room, the smallest details mattered more. A label's adhesive, a timestamp, the measured distance between mouths and glasses. I told Claire I'd text when I got home so she wouldn't worry. She said lightly that I was indestructible and something in the air dropped half a degree. On the sidewalk, the night held a crisp, dry edge. The heater glow weakened to a memory through the glass. Luis stepped out as if for a breath, held his phone low, and showed me a freeze frame from the camera. An amber hospice bottle tilted over my glass. The label crop was too tight for a name, but the shape alone hammered something tender. I knew that bottle. It matched the set in the cardboard box I had never had the heart to empty. The box of Maggie's end-of-life meds I stored in the garage under winter coats and wedding china. 3 people know my alarm code. 3 people had keys to the stories in that house. Me, my daughter, and my son-in-law. Recognition didn't explode. It sank like lead in water until the surface went still over a new depth. I thanked Luis, asked him to preserve the footage and to hand it to his manager discreetly with a copy for my counsel. He said he would pull the file to a secure drive and that the manager respected process more than theater. The straightforwardness of his promise steadied me. I walked Claire to the valet stand, kissed her cheek, and let her move away with a smile designed for other people in line. When her tail lights disappeared into city light, I stood with my hands in my pockets and wrote the rest of the night in my head like a checklist. Documentation would be the map, the sealed glass to a lab in the morning, a request for the saved video, a log of times and words while memory was still fresh enough to be sworn. I would not call the police yet. An arrest at a copper-walled restaurant would burn hours I needed for quiet work and invite a headline built to sell to people who don't read past paragraph 2. A scandal is a second injury. I wanted a record that would survive scrutiny and a plan that would survive character. Driving home, I kept the heater low and the windows cracked, the old ranch trick for staying alert on straight roads. The return felt longer than the approach. I replayed the corridor call and the notary at the bar and the tote pad and the dance I didn't take. Each detail found a catalog slot. At a red light, I dictated times and names into my phone and heard my own voice steady enough to pass inspection. I answered a ping from Priya with a thumbs-up emoji she would read correctly. Problem contained, circle back at dawn. In the garage, I stood in front of the hospice box and let the smell of cardboard and dust rearrange my breathing. The gap where a bottle should have been was small, but absence has volume when it touches grief. I closed the lid, turned the deadbolt, and set a chair under the knob, like a man in a motel who knows the room is not the problem, the world is. The portfolio went into the safe. The florist's card slid into the front pocket as a reminder that sweetness can be a costume. I laid a pad and pen on the kitchen island and wrote out the sequence in block letters a tired mind would thank me for in the morning. By midnight, I had a route for the next day, lab first, lawyer second, bank third, a call to Priya tying a bow on the delay. No signatures, no notaries, no daylight squandered on theater. Proof first, then decisions about law and family and the difference between the two. I rinsed a glass, ran the lock routine twice, and stood at the window while Santa Fe settled into its winter quiet. The night had opened a hidden door, but it had also delivered a task I knew how to do. Gather facts, date stamp them, make choices that stand up when someone else reads the file. The city exhaled. I finally did too. At opening bell, I drove the sealed sleeve across town to a lab so discreet its sign was the absence of one. The receptionist took in the barcode, my driver's license, and the way I held the bag like a fragile animal. Rush Tox panel, I said, and signed a chain of custody line that printed the minute and the temperature of the room. A tech in a charcoal smock added a second seal, photographed the sleeve against a forensic grid, and handed me a receipt whose plain font felt more merciful than any apology. Outside, the air had that thin, bright quality Santa Fe wears after a cold night. It made decisions easier to hear. I didn't wait for news. I stacked the day with errands that built a perimeter. Priya called before I cleared the lot. A blogger had tipped her that I was declining cognitively. The phrase sounded like a stranger trying on my jacket. I forwarded my neurologist letter in a brief note. Subject: coercion attempt, documentation. I appended a line that said we would speak tomorrow on a recorded line only. She didn't ask for drama, she asked for timing. Morning works, she said, and hung up like a grown-up. The bank pinged next, a courtesy text confirming an outgoing wire to a new joint account labeled with my name and Claire's. I called the manager and made my voice a floor. Freeze every outgoing transfer unless my voice authorizes it on your recorded line. He said, copy, and I believed him because fear sharpens your ear for sincerity. I followed with an email that would live in a vault longer than my pulse. Date, time, instruction, and the words do not waive under any circumstances. By late morning, the lab called with a preliminary. Clonazepam in the residue, benzodiazepine markers clean enough to hum. A second voice, their latent print consultant, said they had lifted a partial ridge from the glass rim and matched it to a fingerprint in a public record tied to Noah Park's concealed carry permit. Preliminary, he cautioned, not a courtroom finish, but corroborative. I thanked him and sat with the steering wheel under my palms until the world sharpened back into numbered lanes. Home had rearranged itself while I was out. The striker plate on the garage side door showed a fresh polish where screwdriver met metal. In the rafters, the cardboard hospice box carried the small disorder that happens when a hand takes and does not replace. One amber bottle missing. Grief isn't a wave, it's a weight. It sank through me and found the floor. I stood with the lid in my hand and told the empty garage what I should have told it months ago. I left a door open because love asked me to, and someone walked through because appetite said please. By early afternoon, my attorney had a draft will in my inbox that read like a boundary made of brick. Claire and Noah removed as beneficiaries. A spendthrift trust drawn for any grandchild the world might hand me, guarded against other people's decisions. We scheduled a signing as soon as I walked in. I initialed everywhere the law asked me to be certain. The pen felt heavier than it had last week, but my hand didn't shake. Then I built a thin, serviceable press paragraph in case rumor turned into a brush fire. I am of sound mind. The transaction proceeds. The team remains in place. The mission endures. No names, no bile, no oxygen for gossip. I saved it to a folder called Rain. I messaged Claire and Noah with an invitation that didn't sound like one. Let's review closing paperwork tomorrow morning at the office. I chose the glass conference room with the camera I'd installed after a small break-in 2 summers ago. My CFO and outside counsel would wait in the next room, off camera, ready to step in if words slid off the roadway. I printed labels for a folder whose spine could stand up under scrutiny: toxicology prelims, stills from Canyon Flame, the ceiling receipt, bank logs, a list of times, and enough white paper for notes a judge might someday read. At dusk, the CFO called with a tone that meant someone had kicked the legs out from under a chair. At 3 a.m., Horizon Care had received an email from me instructing them to halt the sale and threatening litigation. The header was clean enough to fool a sleepy person, routed through a server our IT had seen once before when Noah pitched a crypto side project to a junior engineer. If Priya had believed it, value would have bled out of the deal and my reputation with it. We pulled the headers, traced the route, and copied legal. I wrote Priya one line: ignore the 3 a.m. Only instructions on authenticated, recorded calls count. She replied, understood, and for the first time all day, I laughed without humor. The evening asked for a confession, and not the kind I wanted to make in public. I opened the hard drive where family loves and let Maggie's voice climb out of years we still owned. Claire at 5 announcing a backyard play, Claire at 12 meeting a new puppy, Claire at 22 tossing her cap while I tried not to count the months since Maggie's last scan. I didn't play to punish myself. I played to remember how to walk into a room tomorrow without dragging a judge behind me. When the videos ended, I wrote a letter titled, For Claire. Someday. I told her why we chose her name, how the light in our old kitchen found her hair in a way that made us forgive the mortgage rate, how I am learning late that boundaries and love can share a sentence without canceling each other. I did not excuse anything. I left space where an apology might one day fit, not from me to her, but from her to the version of me who taught her what promise means. The night put on its quiet clothes. I laid the confrontation folder on the table and rehearsed the only path I would offer in the morning: a written confession, voluntary resignation from any role at Mesa Care, full cooperation with a forensic audit, and a public statement affirming my competency. In return, I would hold criminal charges in reserve unless compelled by subpoena. Not mercy and not vengeance. Just a line drawn where a door used to be. I slept like a man who has chosen his next set of verbs. At first light, I ironed a shirt because order is armor, drove to the office, and watched the conference room camera blink awake. The folder sat where Claire would see it when she sat down. Outside the glass, my CFO and counsel waited with faces that knew math, law, and kindness in equal measure. I put water on the table and checked the pen. The day would do what it had come to do. I would too. Morning put a hard shine on the conference room glass, the kind of light that makes fingerprints honest. I set the folder where Claire would sit. Camera indicator a steady pinprick above the door, 2 bottles of water centered like neutral witnesses. Behind the wall, my CFO and outside counsel waited in the small lounge, off camera, available the instant the ground shifted. I rehearsed the order one more time. Facts first, boundaries second, options last. They arrived together, coats folded over their arms, faces arranged for business. I asked them to sit, slid a single-page summary across the table, and let the rest of the folder breathe at the edges. The summary carried timestamps and nouns that refused melodrama. The sealed glass from Canyon Flame, the lab's preliminary finding of clonazepam and residue, still frames showing an amber hospice bottle tilted over my place setting, the restaurant's chain of custody label, headers from a 3 a.m. spoof that used a server Noah once pitched as innovative. I kept my voice level and let the paper do most of the work. Their eyes moved like people reading their incomes evaporate syllable by syllable. I said I had not called the police, for now. A public arrest would do more damage than justice requires, and Mesa Care's people did not deserve a headline for breakfast. I had, however, filed to modify my estate and remove them as beneficiaries. A spendthrift trust would protect any grandchild from adult mistakes. I would also be filing a civil protective order today. I put those decisions on the table without heat. Boundaries should sound like policy, not punishment. Then the questions I needed on the record. Why did an amber hospice bottle, the kind from a box in my garage, appear over my drink? Why had a notary coincidentally been stationed at the bar on a Tuesday? Why pressing a power of attorney at dinner instead of in daylight with counsel? Claire's hands stayed folded, but a tendon in her wrist telegraphed strain. She said she meant to help me sleep, something light, and that the paperwork was to protect me. Noah called everything a misunderstanding, said he loved me like a son loves a father, said the email fiasco was some hacker's idea of sport. I let the sentences pass like weather across a windshield and returned to the road. I offered the only route that didn't end with a courthouse changing everyone's clothes. A written confession outlining the Canyon Flame incident and the POA plan. Voluntary resignation from any present or future role at Mesa Care. Full cooperation with a forensic audit covering vendor relationships and reimbursements. Complete access granted. A public statement affirming my competency and clarifying that the transaction continues. In return, I would hold criminal referrals in reserve unless compelled by subpoena. Not forgiveness, not vengeance, a contract with consequences. Claire asked if we could speak alone. I sent Noah to the lounge and waited until the latch settled. Her voice found a lower register I recognized from childhood apologies and adult emergencies. Remodel costs had outrun estimates. A medical bill had arrived with a number that did not care about dignity. She said Noah had taken out a life insurance policy on me as a hedge, and she had not stopped him because she had never learned how to stop him. I asked whether she poured the vial because she believed in the plan or because she believed in him. Her mouth started to form an answer and then closed. The silence between us arrived with a shape. We brought Noah back. I affirmed the line again, accept the terms within 24 hours, or I would refer the matter to the DA, file the protective order, and release whatever facts were necessary to protect the deal in my name. The camera blinked its patient blink. Noah spread his hands. Claire looked at the folder like it might discover empathy. I kept my posture still so the message wasn't delivered by posture. My phone buzzed on the table, counsel's name, 2 words on the preview, a PS complaint. While they sat there, an anonymous report had been filed with Adult Protective Services alleging that I was being financially exploited by unknown parties, a procedural move that could freeze escrow if a caseworker wanted to be thorough. The timestamp was 10 minutes after they entered the building. I turned the phone so the time faced them, then pointed to the wall clock and let arithmetic do what rhetoric can't. The room tightened another notch. Procedure took over. I requested their keys, badges, and any company devices. IT would revoke access at once. CFO would halt approvals that touched either of them. Any communication from this point would travel through counsel. It felt like closing a barn door, and I hated the metaphor even as I turned the latch. I dictated a brief memo to the file, read it aloud for the camera, and emailed counsel to secure a sworn statement from Luis and to have the restaurant's video copied to an encrypted drive we controlled. Emotion tried to audition. I sent it to the hallway again. I reminded them of the deadline and stood so the meeting would know it was over. Claire placed her badge down with care. Noah set his beside it with the performative sigh of a man who reads himself as injured. They left without slamming the door. Behind the glass, my CFO exhaled like someone who had carried something heavy down a long flight of stairs. Alone in the room, I counted the beats between my breaths and matched them to the blinking camera. Choice had been offered, consequence had been described, documentation had been captured. The day would now convert promises into paperwork. I collected the folder, thanked the team in the lounge, and walked back to my office feeling both older and properly aligned. The next steps were clear: file the protective order, shore up escrow against nuisance filings, and turn the audit lights on everywhere shadows had been invited. Somewhere down the hall, a printer started up, that small municipal sound that means facts are about to get their uniforms. By noon, the courthouse air had that chalky smell of old paper and disinfectant, the scent of decisions that won't come back. I signed a petition for a protective order with a pen that felt heavier than its barrel allowed. Writing my daughter's name in the respondent box divided the page into before and after. The clerk stamped the time. My attorney slid copies into a red-tabbed folder. Civility acquired a docket number. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man boarding a lifeboat after setting fire to the ship that kept him warm. Priya's counsel moved the escrow the same afternoon down to a San Antonio bank whose compliance team reads footnotes the way surgeons read scans. They tightened language I'd once found insulting: void if hospitalized, void if adjudicated incompetent. For one breath, I bristled at being reduced to a clause. The next breath, I was grateful that strangers were willing to stand between me and a rumor with a badge. Guardrails can sting and still save. We lit the audit lights. Forensic accountants, neat as winter, unspooled our vendor list and frowned at a recurring entry named like a hygiene product: quarterly data hygiene. Invoices doubled across 2 quarters per year. The EIN walked us straight to a Delaware LLC Noah formed a year after the wedding. The stair steps of cash flowed into a crypto exchange the month Luna cratered, and the people who should have known better learned what gravity costs. Noah called it a pilot I had once greenlit. Our controller produced 2019 minutes where I killed the idea in 30 syllables and a period. Paper, in its patience, can be a witness. Claire's affidavit landed next. Under oath, she called it attempted sedation to obtain a signature for a durable power of attorney while I was resting. She insisted the intention was protection. I read the words the way a judge might, parsing tone as much as fact. When ink says, "for your own good," context becomes a defendant of its own. A PS knocked at midweek, a caseworker with the practiced eyes of someone who spends her days in kitchens like mine. I laid out the neurologist's letter, the lab's prelim, the timestamps, the canyon flame. Still, she asked careful questions, typed quietly, and then closed her laptop with the mercy of procedure. unfounded. At the door, she said she sees this pattern weekly and that it never gets easier to explain to the elderly that love doesn't inoculate them against leverage. I wanted to tell her I wasn't the elderly. I let the word occupy the hallway and then followed it out. Security grew a second skin, new locks, new codes, tokens revoked, badges invalidated, passwords rotated until muscle memory had to learn better habits. The bank added a voice print on file and a passphrase so odd I had to write it under the coaster until repetition burned it in. Family had been a key, now it was a border. The distinction is not an accusation. It is a map. In the garage, I lifted the hospice box, and drove to the pharmacy that handles destruction without speeches. A tech in blue gloves inventoried the contents and stamped a receipt that looked like any other, except my hand shook when I took it. It felt like a delayed funeral for the last physical argument Maggie and I had with time. I sat in the parking lot and let the dashboard cool while the paper warmed in my grip. Luis gave his sworn statement to my attorney and refused cash with a simple shake of the head. He accepted a formal commendation sent to his supervisor and 2 paid days off the restaurant could spare. Time will do more good, he said. He was right. Decency is owed wages that dollars can't cover alone. I drove the turquoise trail down to Madrid and ordered green Chile stew that arrived with its own weather. A cover band misread Springsteen and failed him bravely. I ate slowly and decided to be alive on purpose. Survival is a reflex. Living is a schedule you write by hand. The stew's heat and the resin of piñon smoke stitched me back to the surface. Back in town, Priya forwarded an email from a source attaching a PDF dressed in a state seal and a font that wanted to be official. It claimed I was under criminal investigation, a notice to frighten investors and trigger our morals clause. Counsel filed a takedown and a complaint with the AG's cyber unit. Within a day, the document's metadata traced to an IP in Noah's co-working space. The audacity was almost architectural. I saved the trace to the folder labeled Rain and added one more tab, Morals Clause, Countermeasures. We built a narrow hallway for any leaks. Every confirmation would live on recorded lines. PR drafted a neutral holding statement that affirmed continuity and competence without throwing kerosene in any direction. I signed a limited authorization that let counsel and comms respond inside an hour if something flared while I was learning to sleep again. Speed, like truth, has to be ready before the alarm rings. Each action carried a cost measured in small humiliations and private victories. The order protected me and made me feel aged. The audit hurt and helped in equal measure. The locks preserved my sleep and reminded me who I'd let near the door. I wrote lists and crossed off items like a man cleaning a barn after a storm, not because it would impress anyone, but because the smell is better when you finish. By week's end, the perimeter held. The escrow was armored. The audit had a spine. A PS had filed the orchestrated fear where it belonged, closed. The counterfeit notice had been tagged to its source and folded into a larger file with longer consequences. I sat at my dining table and realized the next work was of a different category. Not defense, not counterpunch, but arrangement. The team at MesaCare needed steadiness. The court would need dates and signatures. The Whitman Trust paperwork waited like a gate I wanted to push open. The tacita I'd been eyeing across town had a view of hills that looked like a sentence ending in a period. I poured water, not rye, and wrote the words Path to Resolution at the top of a page. Boundaries were in place. Now I needed bridges that didn't pretend the river wasn't there. I thought about Claire, about letters I might send and visits I might accept, about fines that teach and forgiveness that refuses to be cheap. I drew a line from order to grace and left space between them for air. I gathered the team in the break room because fluorescent light and mismatched chairs make promises feel practical. I told them the acquisition was steady, client service would not hiccup, and their calendars could keep the same meetings they had last week. I did not name anyone or anything that did not serve continuity. "We continue as planned," I said, and the words landed like sandbags against a rising creek. Heads nodded, shoulders fell an inch. When people trust the roof, they go back to work. That afternoon, I signed my resignation as CEO and in the same breath, the agreement to stay on 6 months as a paid advisor. Stewardship has a clock. So does grief. A clean handoff is one way to honor both. I walked the floor, touched the back of empty chairs, and left a note on the support desk saying simply, "Thank you for keeping us useful." Horizon Care's counsel sent over a statement I had already drafted in my head. Brief, accurate, dull in all the right places. I signed the version that affirmed my competency, clarified the timeline, and emphasized continuity. No names, no smoke. If they needed it, they could release it without calling me first. Boredom is underrated when your fortune and good name are in the same sentence. Court came through the way weather sometimes does. Sudden, decisive, colder than expected. The protective order was granted. If Claire wanted visitation restored, she would attend a counseling program on financial abuse and complete it. I agreed to a protocol that began with email only, no unscheduled contact, no meetings without a third person. "Email first," I told my attorney, "and we'll measure from there." The phrase felt like a lifeline and a limit at once. Noah's case took a different shape. He accepted a plea on the shell vendor fraud and signed restitution terms that looked heavy until you compared them with what might have been. The district attorney declined to pursue the attempted sedation after my letter argued that jail would teach the wrong lesson to the right person. I did not wish him luck. I wished him a teacher he could not charm. I moved money the way a farmer moves seed. Deliberately, to ground I wanted to see change. The Whitman Trust for Community Health opened with a wire that would have shocked my younger self. We set aside a stream of micro-grants for APS caseworkers who pull elders out of houses after midnight and need hotel rooms without paperwork. On the memo line I wrote, "For the nights when a cot matters," and felt something inside me sit down and breathe. Then I moved myself. The casita sat on a rise where piñon made the evening smell like old hymnals. I brought 2 suitcases, 1 box of kitchen basics, and the atlas in a locking cabinet that clicked shut with a satisfaction I didn't expect. The quiet there is not silence. It is a room that has learned where to place sound. I slept the way you sleep after sandbagging, too hard then honestly. Recovery for me needed small disciplines with soft edges. I penciled Big Bend in the atlas and drew a line under it like a promise, then set about the more ordinary work, morning walks, unseasoned food cooked with attention, a ban on screens after 10 unless the sky was on fire. I wrote lists that ended with "sit outside until the light changes," and crossed them off without guilt. Luis never asked for anything, which made it easier to give him something that cost more than cash. I added his name to my Christmas list and wrote a job reference that described his steadiness the way a surveyor might describe bedrock. "You made time for me," I told him on the phone. "Let this buy you some of yours." He laughed once, softly, and said he would take his wife and baby on the rail runner for a Saturday ride. At my new desk, I opened the folder labeled "For Claire," someday, and began a letter that grew longer than I intended. I wrote about the first time she fell asleep on my chest with the TV murmuring a late game, about the way Maggie would run a hand through her hair when she was thinking hard, about boundaries that hold like fences around a garden you intend to keep. I did not mail it. Some messages need the world to arrive at them first. When anger checked back in, I let it stand on the porch. I named the part of me that wanted to salt the earth and the part that chose to plant again behind a fence. Both parts are honest. Only one builds anything. I learned to bless the fence without apologizing for it. Publicly, we kept the line narrow and clean. PR used a holding statement that said little and meant everything. Horizon Care and I agreed that confirmations would live on recorded lines and that we would treat rumor like weather. Notice it, dress appropriately, keep driving. Understood, Priya said on a short call. Understood, I echoed. Days took on a quieter geometry. I reviewed transfer reports, signed fund documents, answered engineering questions that needed a historian more than a boss. By late afternoon, I closed the laptop and turned to the atlas or the sync, whichever felt truer. In restaurants, I lifted orange juice to the light out of habit and made a joke so the server didn't worry. Trust grows back layer by layer. A man can practice without pretending. When the house settled each night, it did not feel like a bunker. It felt like a place arranged for work that doesn't show up on payroll. I answered Claire's first email with 3 sentences that had no adjectives. She replied with 2. A beginning can be that small and still be honest. In the margin of the week, I penciled the date everyone else cared about, closing. I had done what I could to make the path level and the signs legible. The team was steadied, the court satisfied, the trust funded, the casita stocked with coffee and silence. I ironed a shirt and set aside a fountain pen because rituals matter. When I turned out the lamp, I felt the room hold me instead of the other way around. The horizon did not move. I did. Tomorrow I would sign my name and it would feel less like an exit. At 2 in the afternoon, the conference room clock clicked forward and I signed the last page. Priya checked the tabs like a pilot, slid the countersigned packet back, and shook my hand, firm, dry, professional. Relief stepped off my shoulders. Age arrived a beat later to remind me what it had been carrying. The press release went out exactly as planned. Short, accurate, uneventful. Dates, verbs, continuity. No mythology, no gossip. Dignity often looks like boredom to people who weren't in the room. I drove north toward Abiquiu with the windows cracked to let the desert correct me. The river wrote its patient cursive beside the road. My life had become quieter. It had not become smaller. That distinction felt like the first deep breath after pushing off a pool wall. Service returned on a ridge and an email arrived, a counseling certificate attached, a simple request for coffee on Sunday morning in a public place. I said yes to coffee and left the rest of the calendar blank. Boundaries aren't barricades. They're terms of entry you agree to keep. Noah, meanwhile, receded to a line item, restitution scheduled, consequences marching on time. I didn't wish him luck. I wished him a teacher he couldn't charm and a mirror he couldn't dodge. At dusk, Luis texted a photo. His wife in a red scarf, his baby swallowed by a knit hat, all 3 of them grinning at the rail runner platform as if a train were a promise. I told him the reference letter was out, and that if he needed another on different letterhead, he should ask. Ordinary steadiness had changed my life. The least I could do was help it travel. The next morning, I donated a bench at the Chavez Center pool where old men argue kindly about shoulder surgeries. The plaque is small and exactly right. Rest here, then keep going. I sat for 10 minutes and did both. Back home, the atlas lay open to a page I'd never bent. I traced a finger to Big Bend and stopped short of the date box. Anticipation can be a discipline. Hold the note, then move. Later, at a small place near the plaza, I lifted a glass of orange juice to the light and made a harmless joke to the server. Trust regrows like skin, layer on layer. You don't tug at it to hurry the process. When I locked the casita, the bolt settled with a sound I admire, final without bitterness. The house no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a place built to outlast anger. I listened to the small ticks of settling wood and understood what they were saying. The horizon never moved. I did. On a card by the sink, I wrote 3 instructions for the man I intend to be when the next decision knocks. Close cleanly. Speak plainly. Move forward. They aren't a mantra, they're chores. That night I reread the coffee plan and let it be just that, 1 hour, public, civil, enough. The paperwork was finished, the money parked where it belonged, the trust funded, the team steady, the bench installed. Outside, a train wailed briefly and then the dark resumed its patient work. For the first time in months, I slept without bracing for the next alert. Morning would be blue and ordinary. I would make coffee and stand in the doorway until the air taught me humility again. Maybe I'd turn the atlas page. Maybe I'd let it wait. Endings, it turns out, don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they settle into the room like good furniture and leave just enough space for what comes next. Money didn't invent anyone's nature, it amplified it. When the dust settled, the lesson was plain. Order outperforms outrage. Boundaries are not a verdict against love, they're love with a backbone. A fence keeps a garden alive long enough to feed the people it was planted for. Revenge that burns hot leaves you cold. The only kind that endures is procedural. Freeze what must be frozen. Audit what must be audited. Correct the record in writing briefly once. Freedom often looks like boredom to spectators. Live with it. Peace prefers dull tools. I learned to keep receipts for feelings and facts alike. Timestamp calls, save the email, write down who said what and when. When the room tilts, reach for the rail that won't move when you do. Let paper carry the weight your voice shouldn't have to. Shame will ask for silence. Answer with documentation. Trust returns like skin, not lightning. It shows up as small, stubborn rituals, a glass lifted to the light, a door locked without locking the heart, 3 plain sentences taped where you can see them. Caution can sit beside ease the way a welcome mat sits behind a deadbolt. You can be open and still insist on terms. I abandoned the fantasy of a controlled burn. Scorched earth is easy. Cultivation is harder and kinder. Plant inside a fence. Say yes and not more. Offer coffee, not the keys. Mercy with guardrails is still mercy. To those who feel the floor list beneath them, borrow steadiness until yours returns. Borrow a banker's recorded line, a lawyer's appetite for sequence, a clinician's language for chemicals that borrow consent. Borrow a neighbor's hour, then repay with thanks, wages, references, because ordinary witnesses keep the hinges oiled. Sometimes a quiet professional who notices is the whole difference between rumor and ruin. I will not argue with secrecy or drama. I will answer with procedure and make room for grace. My life is smaller in noise and larger in choice. I measure success in unassigned hours and in the quiet click of a latch that works. I haven't changed the hinge of the story. A whisper warned me. Process saved me. I shut the door on panic, opened the door to proof, and stepped through, carrying only what would be useful on the far side. The smell of oranges and cold air no longer sparks fear. It reminds me to work the problem and set the glass down if it clouds. 3 lines kept where I can't miss them. Close cleanly, speak plainly, move forward. They are chores, not slogans. Do them and the horizon stops feeling like a dare. It becomes a direction. Some endings don't erupt. They settle. After the signatures dry and the headlines pass, what remains is the quiet work of living, choosing order over spectacle, conscience over impulse, boundaries over blame. Wealth doesn't change who we are. It turns up the volume. So the work becomes simple and difficult at once. Lower the noise, keep the ledger true. Let proof do the lifting when voice wants to shout. Trust returns like skin, not lightning. Layer by layer, with small rituals that teach the body safety again. Lifting a glass to the light, locking a door without locking the heart, writing 3 honest sentences and then keeping them. Dignity, it turns out, is built from ordinary tasks, paying what you owe, thanking the hands that steadied you, correcting the record without lighting a match. There is a mercy in fences when they protect a garden meant to feed more than one season. Boundaries are not cold, they are warm commitments to the future. Justice can be quiet too. A frozen wire, a clean audit, a statement that says enough and nothing more. Freedom often sounds like boredom to bystanders. Live with it. Peace prefers dull instruments. If the room ever tilts for you, believe your own balance. Keep receipts, date the margins, ask for recorded lines, borrow another's steadiness until yours returns, and when it does, step forward, gently, deliberately, toward the horizon that never moved, only waited. Thank you for listening. If this resonated, I'd love to hear your reflections below. What boundary changed your life? What small ritual helped trust grow back? Your voice helps others find theirs. If you'd like more stories like this, please like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It takes a second, it means a lot.